We fill a law enforcement void that exists in the world's oceans, and we'll continue to fill that void until government fills that vacuum. And then we'll hold government accountable.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World. I'm here with Peter Hammarstedt from Sea Shepherd, which I think is one of the coolest environmental organizations in the world. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me.
Ben, it's a big honor for me to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
So Sea Shepherd, we all know from kind of the news channels and social media for these kick-ass campaigns to hunt down, chase down, document illegal activity in the world's oceans. And you've just come from a pretty hair-raising trip, the longest sea chase in maritime history, chased an illegal Spanish vessel for 110 days from the Antarctic Ocean all the way back up into African waters. Where have you been, Peter? Tell me that story.
Well, the Thunder was the most notorious illegal fishing vessel in the world. This was a ship that was wanted by the International Criminal Police Organization, a ship that was on multiple illegal fishing blacklists, a vessel that had made an illicit profit of $60 million in its 10-year poaching career, and yet no government could stop this vessel. It would change its name and change its flag constantly. It would repaint the nameplate on the stern we referred to as a James Bond style license plate. So they would leave port under one name and they would return to port under a different name. And so my crew and I set off to try to shut down this vessel, a ship that no government was able to stop in 10 years, by doing something really simple. The idea was that if we follow this ship wherever that it went for however long it took, then somebody hopefully would bring that ship to justice. It was essentially a citizen's arrest of sorts. As long as we were following this ship, then it couldn't change its name and flag. We would be this spotlight shining up their criminal enterprise, this loud hailer exclaiming to the world, this is where this ship is, right here, right now. Somebody please come and take over this citizen's arrest from us. My crew and I found this ship in the ice floes that surround the Antarctic continent. Through a heavy fog bank, this ship emerged out of the shadows, essentially. The vessel tried to lose us in the heavy ice conditions that the Antarctic is renowned for. Tried to lose us in heavy weather, so 7-8 meter seas beat and battered the ship as we chased them up north. They tried to wait us out for about 2 months. We simply drifted with this ship. They tried to test our patience and outlast us in terms of fuel. But finally, after 110 days of pursuit across 3 oceans covering 11,000 nautical miles, the captain of the vessel, unable to shake us as his pursuers, decided to sink his own ship to try to destroy the evidence on board. And so we had to rescue the captain, rescue all 39 other members of the crew. We handed them over to the authorities in Sao Tome and Principe, and a small group of passionate and compassionate individuals were able to do what no government was able to do, which was to shut down this one particular ship.
And how often do these ships kind of turn violent? I mean, this is criminal activity they're engaged in, shifting flags, shifting location trackers and all that kind of stuff. This is like gangster activity. If I was volunteering for Sea Shepherd, I'd be scared that these situations were going to turn violent. We've heard about violence and slavery and other things happening in especially in kind of distant water fishing fleets. Do you have that fear? Does that ever happen?
I'm glad you mentioned the crime element, Ben, because this is a crime. And what we do is when we look at illegal fishing, we look at illegal fishing as transnational organized crime. If somebody is willing to fish without a license, they're willing to fish with prohibited fishing gear, they're willing to take endangered species, then they're also not going to be paying their taxes. They're not going to be paying customs fees. They're probably forging documents on board. They're not going to be paying their workers either, and they may be abusing their workers. When it comes to the Thunder, the crew physically attacked my crew on a number of occasions, throwing metal objects at our small boat crew as we tried to communicate with the Indonesian fishers who were working on board, who were grossly underpaid for the jobs that they were doing on board the ship. We know that one of the people on the crew had connections with a narcotics trafficking operation in the north of Spain. And actually, the company that he ran with another 2 individuals was busted for bringing in 2 tons of cocaine from Latin America. And the alibi that this crew member used was that it couldn't possibly have been him. He couldn't have possibly been involved because he was on board the Thunder at the time of the crime. So his alibi was actually that he was on board a ship doing illegal fishing. So no, there is a bit of danger going up against these operations. But for me, the bigger danger is not doing something to stop them. The danger is the risk to the ecosystem.
But these ships are not illegal in the sense of out and out drug trafficking. They hide behind a veneer of legality. They have flags. They have often legitimate kind of fishing activities going on as well, don't they? A lot of these companies. So it's a mix of legal and illegal activity, and they switch between one and the other in order to disguise the crimes that they're committing. Is that not the case? Whereas if you find one of these submarines that's loaded with cocaine, it's kind of cut and dry. Whereas there's lots of avenues for these fishing boats to pretend to be legal because some of what they do is legal.
100% right. Because when we look at the statistics that 1 out of 5 fish is caught illegally, that means that 20% of the global catch of fish is through illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, so-called IUU fishing. I think your average person would ask, well, how is it possible? How is it possible that 1 out of 5 fish is caught illegally and we're not able to stop it? And you hit the nail on the head, Ben, because these companies are essentially involved in, it's not money laundering, although some of them are involved in money laundering. It's fish laundering. So if you have 5 vessels that you're operating at sea, one of them is fishing without a license, that illegal vessel will offload its catch onto a legal boat out at sea, out of sight of authorities. By the time the legal boat gets to port, the catch origin has already been obscured. So you're right, the legal fishery is absolutely necessary for backing up the illegal fishery.
And that's, of course, without dwelling on the fact that the legal fishing activity is more than the ocean can sustain, because laws around fishing are terribly lax. Many countries simply don't have the wherewithal to put in place proper quotas. They get coerced into handing over their fishing rights to richer, more powerful nations, whether they're European or Chinese. And so even the legal activity is more than the oceans can bear. So if you chuck in a whole bunch of illegal fishing to the tune of 20% of all the fish caught, that really is tipping these ecosystems over the edge, which is why you do what you do.
What's the difference between an illegal fishing boat and a legal fishing boat? Sometimes it's just that one of those vessels actually paid the license fee to carry out their destructive activities. So just because something is legal doesn't mean that it isn't destructive to the environment. So you're absolutely right. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization believe that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. And the largest part of that fishing pressure comes from legal fishing industry.
Yeah, which are often represented by multinational-owned ships registered and owned in the developed world, European ships, for example, who then go down and plunder waters in, say, West Africa, leading to communities being short of food, and ecosystem collapse in the ocean in those kind of places literally translates into hunger and malnutrition and so on. Which is why Sea Shepherd is doing such a vital job, because enforcement is sorely lacking in the rich world, let alone in the poor world. And that really is what Sea Shepherd's all about, right? It's a global kind of volunteer marine police organization that chooses its battles very carefully and goes out and looks for illegal activity in order to expose it, scandalize it, and push for action. What about policing legal activity? Where there's a European ship doing something immoral but technically legal. Is Sea Shepherd making an effort on that as well?
So the European Union fishing fleet is at about 2.5 times the capacity of what could be, quote unquote, sustainably caught in European waters. So essentially what the European Union has done is they've exported their overfishing capacity to developing countries, especially in West Africa. These are vessels that are subsidized by European taxpayers. Their fuel is subsidized. The construction of new ships is subsidized, and even their licensing fees are subsidized. And it puts the developing countries at a severe competitive disadvantage, where it just becomes this kind of extractive relationship, this fish for cash kind of barter agreement. When it's an illegal vessel, what we're able to do is we're able to bring law enforcement partners from our host country we're working with. So in Liberia, for example, we have the Liberian Coast Guard on board our ship, and we're able to assist our government partners to arrest those ships and bring them back to justice. When it's a legal boat, what we need to do is make sure that they are complying with existing regulations. And through the boardings and inspections that we're able to help facilitate, the government can actually see what's being taken from their waters. And that allows them to actually change the rules and change the laws. So even if it's legal but destructive, the government can't necessarily arrest that ship, of course, but they can change the laws to make the laws stricter. And I've got plenty of examples of that, where what we've uncovered through these boardings have led to stricter laws within our partner countries.
I mean, it must be pretty horrifying. Peter, you've grown up like me with a great love of wildlife and nature, and you're devoting your life to this activity, this vital activity that no one else is doing. When you board one of these boats, you must see some pretty bad stuff, right? In terms of human rights abuses and suffering on the part of the crew, and hideous bycatch and obliteration of marine ecosystems.
Well, when I was in Gabon in Central Africa, the fisheries minister actually wanted to come on board our ship to go on patrol with us. And so I accompanied Gabon's fisheries minister on the boarding and inspection of a shrimp trawler that was licensed to fish in the waters of this Central African country. When we watched the net come up on deck and the catch spill out, there was only 0.2% of the catch was shrimp. The other 99.8% was other marine wildlife, most of which was brought on board dead. All of that was essentially thrown overboard. And it's a visual that will always stick with me because it was the literal equivalent of killing tens of thousands of animals for one single shrimp cocktail. That's how destructive these ships are. But the minister, seeing the destructiveness firsthand, decided to firstly place this vessel under arrest. Its fishing net was actually undersized. But secondly, he passed a decree suspending the entire shrimp fishery. So another 2 vessels that belonged to this fleet were also sent back to port in Libreville, where they remained for over a year. And I think that speaks to the importance of really collaborative efforts. By us being able to bring this minister out to the scene of the crime, he was able to shut down an entire fishery because he saw the destructiveness firsthand.
And of course, there's pressure from consumers and the public back home. If the images produced by Sea Shepherd, and when they board these boats, and these horrifying images, when they reach Western newspapers, they reach social media, that creates something of a backlash here. Because I think that backlash does work. I mean, I don't know if you saw that film, My Octopus Teacher, and the number of people that watched that film and now say, rightly or wrongly, they say, I don't eat octopus because of that film. It did change something there, whatever your views are on eating octopus. And I think when you take these kind of real life stories and you create visuals and you provide the evidence to large numbers of people, I think you can create a pressure for change.
Well, the oceans are out of sight and out of mind for most people. And I think it was Sir Paul McCartney who often said that, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, then everybody would be vegetarian. Now, with fishing, we have to imagine that these slaughterhouses are hundreds or sometimes thousands of miles offshore, accessible only by ship. The destructiveness happens underneath the surface of the water. It's oftentimes not visible. So I think we only have 30, 40 crew on board one of our ships, but by bringing cameras on board, by bringing journalists with us, we're able to bring millions of people around the world along for the journey, and they're able to then see secondhand what's happening. And the European fishing boats that are fishing in West Africa, this is not fish that's being consumed by West Africans. This is all being exported to Europe. So the tuna that's being caught in West Africa, all of that is being consumed in the United States, North America, and in Europe. So yes, we have to tackle it from both sides, both from the side of the crime where the wildlife massacre is happening, but also we have to affect the markets as well. And you're right. I think we do that through the visuals.
Yeah, I mean, the most immoral story recently I read about is the plundering of West African waters of their highly nutritious forage fish, which are really, really important part of the diet of people living along those coasts, and the use of that forage fish to produce factory farmed salmon, whose farms are absolutely destroying waters in places like Norway and Iceland and Scotland. And the conversion rate is just appalling. I don't remember the number, but something like 20 kilos to produce 1 kilo or some such. It's a decadence that really is beyond belief. And of course, it's not just fish. The origins of Sea Shepherd. Paul Watson was keen to tackle the Japanese whaling industry head on. And even now, I read recently that somewhere in the region of 10,000 dolphins a year are being swept up and killed inadvertently by the French pair trawling industry in the Bay of Biscay. I don't know if that number is right, but if it is, it's just mind blowing.
So I first joined Sea Shepherd because of the issue of whaling. I saw a picture of a dead whale being pulled up the slipway of an 8,000-ton factory ship down in the Antarctic. And the sight of that image just shocked me to my core. And I spent 12 years chasing Japanese whaling ships around the frozen continent of Antarctica, and 12 campaigns that resulted in over 6,000 whales being saved through direct action. But the biggest problem facing cetaceans today is not whaling. The whalers of the world from Iceland, Norway, and Japan together kill about 3,000 whales every year, but over 300,000 whales and dolphins die every single year through fishing gear entanglement. In places like the Bay of Biscay, as you mentioned, Ben, where over 11,000 dolphins are caught up in trawl nets. So the real threat to whales and dolphins today is not whaling. The main threat is industrial fishing, which kills 100 times more cetaceans than all the whalers of the world combined. And it's easy for us in the UK or in the United States to condemn whaling because we can't buy whale meat at the local pub, right? It's not available at our restaurants. It's easy to condemn things that require no lifestyle changes on our part. But when we're consuming tuna, when we're consuming other marine wildlife, we are financing the death of whales and dolphins.
This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com. Now, I want to read a quote from The Origins of Sea Shepherd. Paul Watson said once, "I used to swim with these beavers in a beaver pond when I was 10. I went back when I was 11 and I found there were no more beavers. I found that trappers had taken them all, so I became quite angry. And that winter I began to walk the trap lines and free animals from the traps and destroy the traps." This is how I felt as a kid. I felt powerless and I wanted to find ways in which I could make a difference. And I think the reason why Sea Shepherd has appealed to me so much for so many years is because what Paul Watson did was pull together a band of brave people, buy a boat, then a second boat, then a third boat, and initially chased down those Japanese whalers. And they played a major role in the end of industrial whaling, which almost pushed whales over the edge into extinction. And I guess, Peter, there are some who say, we need to leave everything to governments. We need to leave everything to the law. We need to do everything on the inside. We need to work with elected decision makers and so on. We've had all kinds of debates here in the UK around reintroductions. Beavers, for example. One government after the next across decades refused to sanction the reintroduction of beavers. And then, of course, a bunch of guerrilla rewilders released beavers in various river catchments. And now every single beaver that is free living and now legally protected in Britain is there because of those illegal releases. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't delighted that people took matters into their own hands in the way that Paul Watson did all those years ago. So where is the line for Sea Shepherd, today in terms of policing this terrible behavior, bringing out footage and imagery for the rest of the world, but also chasing down boats and doing things that are quite risky? Where's the line?
So governments are slow to react, right? It's like turning an oil tanker and bringing an oil tanker to a complete stop. It takes a lot of time, and you need really committed small groups of passionate individuals to be able to drive that change. Government usually will jump on board when the wider public supports the efforts that are driven by that small group of individuals. And then usually governments will take credit for what that small group of people started. I think for Sea Shepherd, we started talking about the chase of the Thunder. And what I think is really remarkable about that story is that the Thunder was one of 6 ships fishing illegally down in the Antarctic. About 80 days into this 110-day chase, the chase started getting media attention. And people around the world started asking of themselves and asking of their elected leaders, why was it the role of a small non-governmental organization to do the job that governments should have been doing? And so after the Thunder sank, government action inspired by that chase really kicked into gear. And in less than 6 months after the Thunder sank, we saw another 2 ships arrested in Cabo Verde, 1 ship arrested in Senegal, a vessel sunk by the Indonesian authorities, and another vessel arrested in Malaysia. The action by Sea Shepherd inspired government action. You need a wide coalition of partners to bring about change. I don't think we can achieve things in a vacuum, but I think we can set an example in that vacuum to begin with, to be able to inspire others to do more things. The number of ships we have within our fleet is greater than the navies of a lot of countries in the world, but it doesn't compare to the U.S. Navy or the British Royal Navy. If we can inspire the governments of the world to take law enforcement at sea seriously, then that will bring about real, long-lasting, sustainable change. So I think you need both. You need people to really push the limit. For us, the limit is we don't break the law. We work to help enforce the law. The law is the limit for us. And the metrics that we use to determine whether a campaign is successful or not is unique among NGOs because it's the number of criminal operations we shut down and the number of animals we're able to save. Those are the 2 metrics that drive us.
I mean, undoubtedly, Sea Shepherd made its name in the great battle to save the whales, bringing to the attention of the world the horror that was going on far out of sight on those factory ships. The last of the whales being dragged up those ramps. Those images led directly to the International Whaling Commission and a global ban on whaling. Where are the big impacts today? What are you most optimistic about when you go to sleep at night? Which are the successes that give you the warmest feeling in your belly?
I mean, what I'm really, really proud of is the work that we're doing around the African continent, because we're filling a real need. We're working with 8 countries around the African continent, countries that have a coast guard, they have a navy, but they don't necessarily have the vessel asset that can cover the entirety of their maritime jurisdiction. The authorities can see these illegal trawlers operating in their waters. They can see it happening from their beaches. And so what we're able to do is we're able to bring our ship to these countries where our generous donors around the world are able to provide the fuel. We bring the crew who run the ship, and our government partners provide the law enforcement detachment with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest ships. The law enforcement authorities stationed on board our ship, and we go to patrol. We've assisted our government partners to arrest 99 vessels for illegal fishing to date. We've largely eliminated illegal fishing from the waters of Liberia. We've largely eliminated illegal fishing from the waters of Gabon. And if we can do it there, we can do it in the entire Gulf of Guinea region. If we can do it in the Gulf of Guinea, we can do it around the entire continent. If we can do it there, we can do it around the world. I think environmental groups in general, we're so caught up in the big picture, like we've got to stop the climate crisis. We have to save the oceans, that when we're looking at goals like that, then we struggle to find what are the steps to reach that end goal. I like to celebrate the victories along the way to that large goal. And those victories are things like eliminating illegal fishing from the waters of one country.
But aren't you just one well-placed bribe or one kind of act of coercion away from being turfed out of a particular African country's waters in order to let, say, a Chinese or Spanish fishing fleet in? And if those politicians decide that it's more lucrative to them in the short term to reopen the waters to industrial fishing fleets coming in and pillaging all the marine life, then what can Sea Shepherd do about it?
So we've been working in Gabon since 2016. In 2018, 2 years after that partnership began, the government of Gabon created the largest network of marine protected areas in Africa. 26% of the waters of Gabon protected. 1 year later, because of evidence that we were able to gather on our campaign of European purse seiners deliberately setting their fishing nets on whales and whale sharks, the Gabonese government banned that practice. And a European purse seiner that we documented committing that crime was fined 250,000 euros and lost their license. In 2021, the government of Gabon banned the finning of sharks, skates, and rays, also because of documentation that we were able to gather through our partnership of the trawlers that operated in Gabonese waters engaged in finning. And then, of course, that same year, the shrimp fishery was suspended. We have a long history of working in these countries, and we understand that there are many challenges, but the governments work with us because we are able to provide not just a fight against illegal fishing, but we're able to boost the maritime security capacity of that country. You mentioned earlier, Ben, that food insecurity in the areas is a real big problem when foreign boats come in. The countries recognize that as well. And Food security quickly becomes a national security issue, and our country partners approach illegal fishing within that broader maritime security context.
Peter, let's talk about the Mediterranean. When I last saw you in person, we had a drink in London and we talked about the work of Sea Shepherd in the Mediterranean. And then I was in Sicily not long afterwards, and you organized for me to get on the boat that was docked there in Sicily with my kids. And I mean, I was amazed to see the operation that Sea Shepherd's put together there. It's a big boat with incredible equipment and supplies and volunteers and very professional crew on the boat. And they were tackling some pretty hideous environmental abuses going on within the Mediterranean. But before we talk specifically about what Sea Shepherd's doing in the Mediterranean, you described to me what you'd learned of how the Mediterranean once was.
There was a Greco-Roman poet by the name of Oppian, and he lived during the rule of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And he actually wrote a how-to-fish guidebook for the Roman Empire. This was a 5-volume book that was to teach Romans about the best techniques of the day, the most modern ways to catch fish. And in one of the books, he describes a technique of fishermen going out in a small boat with a log or a plank of wood that was covered in spikes, like some kind of medieval weapon. And the technique was that you would throw this spiked log over the side of the boat, and it would impale fish as it sunk to the seabed. And then you would just pull that log up and it would be covered in fish. And we read an account like that, or we hear a story like that, and we assume it's just apocryphal, that it can't possibly be true, that you could just throw a spiked log over the side of a boat and catch fish that way. But this was a widely used technique of fishing. There are reports like this all over the world. It's not just restricted to the Mediterranean, of sea captains coming to the Grand Banks of Newfoundland and seeing that there was so much cod that their logbooks wrote that they could almost walk across the backs of cod to shore from ship, or they would throw a bucket overboard and it would be pulled up teeming with fish. We know the concept of a fisherman's tale. And when we talk about fisherman's tale, it's usually about exaggeration, right? But there's a science behind it, and it's called shifting baseline theory. It's that you essentially adapt to diminishment. What you and I think of as an amazing amount of wildlife in the Mediterranean is 10% of what was there 50 years ago. And that's 10% of what had been there, 100 years before then. What we think of as bountiful now is already skewed through our narrow lens of the only ocean that we've ever known, which is largely an empty ocean. And so I think as we talk about, often people talk about sustainable fishing, right? That's a term that's used so often. But sustainable today just means, how can we continue our destructive practices indefinitely? It doesn't allow for fish populations to recover. It doesn't allow for ecosystems to recover. The Mediterranean from Oppian's time is the Mediterranean that is possible. We just have to stop fishing it.
And have you seen examples where marine protected areas have been established or quotas have been set and properly enforced in the Mediterranean or elsewhere where abundance of sea life has reached those kind of levels?
Not reached those other kinds of levels, but there are examples from around the world of marine areas recovering if you put in place marine protected areas that are properly enforced. And if you allow for enough time for these places to recover. It's believed that a fish population, if you remove all fishing pressures, a fish population will basically double every year. So if you have, 1,000 fish in a particular ecosystem and you stop fishing that ecosystem, in 1 year, there's 2,000 of them. In 2 years, there's 4,000 of them. In 3 years, there's 8,000 of them. The ocean has a remarkable ability to recover. The problem is that when we see certain areas start to recover, we immediately want to start fishing them again.
Yeah, the first fish catch in the British North Sea in 1945-6, after 6-7 years of drastically reduced fishing pressure, was said to have been 16 or 17 times larger than the last fishing catch of 1939-40. Michael Bloomberg refers to the recovery of marine life as a hockey stick. The greatest hockey stick you'll find in the world is that recovery. And marine protected areas combined with properly enforced quotas seems to be the answer. And with emphasis on the word enforced, because even when governments do stuff on paper, they tend not to devote the resources to enforcement, which is why it's left to Sea Shepherd. And I have the same feeling that you mentioned earlier, that the various people have said around the world is, why is it left to a little NGO like Sea Shepherd with 4 ships you have around the world's oceans and it's left to you to do this enforcement. It's bonkers. So I suppose the big point of Sea Shepherd, aside from the direct impact you have in the ways that we've discussed, is to leverage action by governments. It's effectively to shame or to spur governments into doing this themselves, and then you have the know-how to show them how to do it.
I think that summarizes it very, very well. We're able to intervene when governments lack either the political will or the economic means, or sometimes even the jurisdiction, because there are areas of the world's oceans that are outside of the authority of any one individual country. But yes, we try to set an example. We fill a law enforcement void that exists in the world's oceans, and we'll continue to fill that void until government fills that vacuum. And then we'll hold government accountable.
So where are the 4 ships right now as we speak?
One ship we have in the Mediterranean Sea, gearing up to start pulling up illegal fishing gear in the Aeolian Islands, and to pull up octopus traps as well that have been set out of season. We have another ship that's currently operating off the coast of West Africa. I can't reveal exactly what country they're working in right now because the ship is still undercover, but we have a law enforcement detachment on board from our host country, and we're on patrol boarding illegal fishing vessels and legal fishing vessels. We have another ship that's currently being outfitted in port in Las Palmas, also working in around the African continent. And we have a ship that just left New Zealand for the Antarctic to be able to focus on what is now the biggest problem facing Antarctica, the krill fishery. And these are massive super trawlers that are targeting the primary food source for whales, penguins, and seals in order to create, among other things, omega-3 health food supplements for which there are plant-based alternatives.
Are they doing that legally or illegally?
They're doing it legally, but they're doing it in what is a proposed marine protected area. And Chile and Argentina proposed this MPA about 7 years ago. And yet every time it's been brought up to the international community to get this MPA passed, it's been blocked. That proposal has been blocked by 2 countries, the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. So they are fishing in an area that legally they can fish for. We want to change that. We want to close this area off to krill fishing.
And which of your ships is active in Baja California? Because, of course, the most endangered cetacean on the planet is the tiny, strange-looking vaquita dolphin, which is being obliterated very fast by illegal fishing. And I read a lot of reports of work that Sea Shepherd's doing.
Our friends at U.S.-based Sea Shepherd Conservation Society are working together with Mexican authorities in Baja California, in the Sea of Cortez especially, to protect the vaquita porpoise. And this is the most endangered cetacean in the world. We believe that there's about 12 of them left. But we're seeing incredible strong enforcement action taken by the Mexican Coast Guard now, taken by the Mexican government to enforce action against illegal fishing in a refuge that's designed to protect this porpoise. So we believe that these numbers can recover, and there's a ship that's on site right now overlooking the vaquita refuge.
Peter, does it get you down? I mean, I've always thought there's not much point being a pessimist, and I think that being optimist generally is the best way to go about things, best way to live our lives. Even an injured world gives us so much, unconditional love. There's so much joy to be found in nature. We're at the beginning of spring here, and it's like a paradise outside. Are you a pessimist or an optimist? You're policing some pretty awful activities and seeing some pretty dreadful things. How do you get by?
Well, I've always been an optimist, and I think it comes from the unique opportunity I had to do a Sea Shepherd campaign when I was 18 years old. And that campaign started with 5.5 months spent in port getting a ship ready to sea. And then finally, after half a year of preparations, we entered the Galapagos Marine Reserve, and within just a couple of hours, came across an illegal long line set to catch sharks. And this was an 8-mile long long line sporting hundreds, if not thousands, of hooks. So we stopped the progress of the ship. We began hauling this long line in. And I remember the crew were ecstatic. Everybody was excited because finally we were taking action, direct action for marine wildlife after half a year in port. But I remember feeling a little bit deflated. I thought, well, okay, here we are pulling up 8 miles, but I knew that there was enough long lines set any given night to wrap around the circumference of the earth 500 times. And here we are pulling up 8 miles. But thankfully that day, my job on the ship was to be on the bow of the vessel, and I had to cut the hooks from the line as the line was coming up on deck. And I remember hours into this seeing the bucket get more and more full with hooks. And I remember holding one of these hooks in my hand and watching it under the moonlit night and thinking, okay, well, this one particular hook is not going to kill a shark or an albatross or a tuna or a dolphin tonight. And to think that that doesn't make a difference is incredibly anthropocentric, because it made all the difference for this one individual animal that would have been dead had we not intervened. And so I think early on in my time as a conservationist, I came to learn that one person can't save the entire world, but you can save the entire world for one individual animal. And that has to be enough to drive you and keep you doing the day-to-day work as you pursue some of those bigger goals. So for me, yeah, I know there are tens of thousands of fishing vessels fishing illegally. But when we're able to arrest one of them, and every day that ship spends in port, it's 22,000 animals saved, we've estimated, for a trawler shut down. That's 22,000 times one individual animal saved. That's a lot of worlds being saved, and that's what keeps me motivated.
I love that, Peter. I love what you do. I'm just filled with admiration for Sea Shepherd, for you personally. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to tell this story to me today.
Thank you, Ben. The admiration is mutual. I appreciate all that you do for conservation, and I appreciate you being a champion for the work that we're carrying out at sea. I hope you'll join us on a ship again someday.
I just can't get my head around the notion that a charity like Sea Shepherd, with just 4 vessels and a brave crew of staff and volunteers, is responsible for policing the world's oceans, especially in places like Antarctica, where industrial trawlers are hoovering up krill on which recovering whale populations depend. I mean, why aren't governments doing this? But thank goodness Sea Shepherd exists, because their impact is just tremendous. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Peter Hammerstedt as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please share the podcast among your friends, colleagues. Get the word out there. We need people to know these stories. Thank you. Next time on the podcast, I'm going to be talking to Rob Gardner of Rebalance Earth. And the topic we're covering, once again, is how to pay for rewilding. A lot of money is needed, and charities are small. There isn't that much philanthropic money around. Governments all seem to be strapped for cash. So how do we get the private sector to pay for the large-scale restoration of ecosystems? Well, Rob Gardner's got an innovative new plan in Rebalance Earth, and I want you to hear it because it's potentially going to make a big difference, initially here in Britain and eventually elsewhere.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species: bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.